Hi guys, how you doing? Hope you're all keeping safe and well. Of course, things are now beginning to change. Today is Wednesday, 13th of May. It's about 3 o'clock. Today is the day when apparently people are supposed to be going back to work. Well, there's certain conditions to that. You're supposed to go to work if you can safely be at work, and we're not going to get into any of that, the whole PPE thing and the social distancing at work. And if you can't work from home and don't use public transport. How are you supposed to get to work if you don't use public transport, particularly here in London? That's what I'm going to get into. Stay tuned. Meanwhile, make sure you're subscribing to this channel. Make sure you follow me on all the social media channels, #BrownCarGuy, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, browncarguy.com. And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you where you can find an exclusive piece of content that's unique there and really entertaining, I hope, and quite enjoyable. Let me know what you think of that afterwards. But anyway, let's get back to this. So we are in London, and of course, now apparently it's back to work time for a lot of people, but it's all very, very confusing because it's like, well, go back to work if you can safely go back to work, and if you can't work from home, but only go back to work if you can't use public transport. So how are you supposed to go to work? Well, you're supposed to walk or cycle or take a car. Now, walking and cycling, well, if you're not too far from home, if your work is not too far from home, I suppose that's conceivable. And we're in the summer, so the weather is not too bad. It's not great at the moment, but it's not too bad, so that's all right. But if you have to use a car, then, well, we know what London is like at the best of times, and we have seen traffic rising steadily. I think it dropped to about 80%, then it crawled back up to about, it dropped by 80%, and it crawled back up to, less than maybe about 40% usage. But anyway, I'm getting myself muddled with that numbers, and I've got a lot more numbers to come, so stay tuned for that. But what I wanted to do was basically look and hypothesize at what might happen in London. So London at the moment has 2.6 million cars, and there's 8.98 million people, so say 9 million people. So basically you're saying that a third of people have cars. If you were to simplify that, in actual fact, 54% of people in London, 54% of households, I should say, have cars. That's a bit less than the national average. So in UK, it's 77% of households own cars. And since they've worked out that, of course, most households where there are cars have more than one person in them, they're saying that about 81% of people actually have access to a car. Not necessarily as drivers, but they have access to a car. So across London, of course, it varies quite a bit. So that 54% is an average. But if you take urban, suburban areas, you take Richmond, for example, that's 77% car ownership, and if you take Islington, where I grew up, central London, that's only, at the moment, that's only 26% car ownership. So extrapolating from that, we could say that, well, 1 in 2 people, I mean, just taking a 54% example, 1 in 2 people have access in London, have already got access to a car. So what about people that now suddenly need to use a car? So say we add another 50% to that, just out of, just for the sake of it, we're talking about another 1.3 million cars. That would take it to 3.9 million cars. That's fairly inconceivable, but also perhaps slightly unrealistic. So let's do this again. What we do know already is that in 2018, there's some stats. Most of these stats I've taken from websites, various websites, RIC and some other sites, but they're all legit. So in 2018, 61% of trips were made by car. It's the most common mode of travel for distances. So 70% of total distances in the UK in 2018 were actually covered by car. So much for train usage, but you can't blame people. Trains can be quite expensive if you get them at the wrong time, whereas if you compared to the cost of fuel, it actually works out better. Anyway, so car use actually accounts for, when it's less than half a mile, it's only 8% of trips, but as soon as it's over 2 miles, it's 76% of trips, and anything more than 3 miles is 80% of trips, so longer than 5 miles, sorry, 80% of trips. So now, let's look at England and Wales, for example. There are 26.5 million working people aged between 16 and 74, and of these, 16.7 million either drive themselves to work or 1.4 catch a lift. So 15.3 million people drive themselves, or 1.4 million catch a lift. So a total of 16.7 million will use a car to get to work. That's out of 26.5 million. Yeah, that's already quite a lot. Anyway, That's outside of the UK. So let's assume that people that need a car to get to work outside of London will probably already have it, and there will be a slight increase in that, although that belies the next point. So looking at, for example, the total number of license holders in the UK is actually about just, well, in fact, it's over 41 million people. However, there are 38.7 million vehicles, but in fact of those, cars are only 31.9. So let's say 32 million cars. There are also 1.3 million bikes, but we're not getting into those right now. It's a whole different ballgame. Although theoretically, that could skew all of what I'm saying substantially. So let's say there are 32 million cars and 41 million license holders. Now we already know from stats that have been out recently that 56% of people who have licenses but don't have a car are saying that they now want to get a car. So that's 9 million people. 56% of that is 5 million people. That's 5 million people that might go out and buy a car, increasing the total car park in the UK, just cars, from 32 million to 37 million. That's an increase of 16%. So we take that 16%. So this is my maths, could be bad, but it's just an example. So we take the 16%, we apply it to London. By doing that, we take the 2.6 million cars that are in London up to 3 million, adding another 400,000 cars. And you're thinking, well, that sounds realistic and doesn't sound that bad, particularly when you consider that most cars spend 80% of their time parked at home and 16% of the time parked elsewhere, so it could be at work. So they are only actually being used for 4% of the time. But if there are more people using cars to get around and there's more car sharing, then they're probably going to be used a bit more than that. I believe that those figures will go up quite a bit. And let me put it in slightly different terms. So I think that's all realistic, but if you really want to scare people, look at it this way. 29.8% of workers in London commute to work by car. So that's a third of people are already using the car to get to work in London. At the moment, we know that 3 million people a day use public transport. 3 million people a day. Public transport use has dropped off in April by 75%. So that's about 2 million people that didn't use public transport. And now essentially that's 2 million people being told not to use public transport, more or less, because presuming that key workers are already using the public transport system. So that's 2 million people that will now need to get into cars to get to work. That's a fairly scary phenomenon, because if you're thinking about, well, that's suddenly gone up from 400 to 2 million. Yeah. So we're looking at probably, okay, let's add a guesstimate. We're talking about between 500,000 to just under 1 million, maybe extra cars, if everybody suddenly decides that they need a car to get to work. It's great on the other hand for the car industry, because there's a lot more cars to sell. It's great also for the used car industry, because they'll see their transactions increase. Both of those industries are suffering quite badly and have been suffering quite badly recently, so that will help. Also, the lower cost of fuel will also help. So happy days for the car industry, and happy days potentially for maybe car journalists, because there are more people now wanting car buying advice, so potentially that's a good thing. And of course taxation, because the government has been spending a lot of money on this COVID-19 situation. In fact, yesterday, what did they say, 14 billion a month is just on the furlough scheme. So they're going to be needing to make some of that money back, so certainly that's going to help them. But of course it's not going to be great for the environment, and that's a whole different conversation. But check back to some of my previous videos that I've done with guests like Kevin Haggerty and James Ruppert, where we've discussed the future of car use and the car industry post COVID-19. Do check them out. So whilst you're doing that, make sure you also subscribe to my channel and hit the bell notification so you get an update whenever I upload a video. Also make sure you follow me on social media channels. You can find me by searching #BrownCarGuy, and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course subscribe also to browncarguy.com. And that exclusive piece of content is here, patreon.com Shazad Sheikh, and here you'll find my parody sequel to the original Cannonball Run movie. It's a lot of fun. Go check it out. Please support me if you can. Otherwise, please keep liking, sharing, commenting on my comment. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.